I used to think good and evil were just ideas, concepts, constructs. The old war stories we wrapped ourselves in when the world felt too chaotic to understand. Good was kindness. Evil was cruelty. Simple, manageable, human. And like most people who believe they're thinking clearly, I believed that evil was mostly noise, isolated cruelties, occasional tragedies, things explainable by psychology, by economics, by broken childhoods and bad luck. The world wasn't full of monsters, I told myself. It was full of broken people making broken choices. It was easier to believe that. Cleaner, safer. I could look at the headlines and cluck my tongue and tell myself that given the right circumstances, all of it would heal itself. Goodness, I thought, was a natural state, a default. Evil was just the absence of goodness, like cold is the absence of heat. A flaw in the system, not a force in its own right. I don't believe that anymore. I can't. Not after reading the pages that follow. Not after holding the weight of a voice that never should have been allowed to speak. Reading the careful, hateful confessions of a creature who spent centuries carving souls away from the light. Good and evil are not abstractions. They are not metaphors. They are real. More real than stone and breath and time. Goodness isn't the absence of evil. Goodness is an active force. A relentless, burning presence that evil recoils from but can never destroy. And evil? Evil is not simply the lack of goodness. It is a will, a hunger, a deliberate sentient rot that fights to unmake what it cannot create, to corrupt what it cannot truly claim. The battle between them is not fought on the grand stages of history alone. It's not only waged between armies or presidents or kings. It's fought in kitchens and bedrooms and classrooms and offices, in the quiet chambers of ordinary human hearts. It's fought in the choice to forgive when bitterness feels more righteous, in the choice to confess when pride would rather dig deeper, in the choice to hope when cynicism feels safer. Evil is patient. It does not need us to be monstrous. It only needs us to be tired, distracted, afraid. It only needs us to forget that we are not alone. Because once we believe the lie that we are alone, that no one sees us, that no one cares, that no one will answer when we cry out, the walls start to crumble. And evil has all the time in the world to slip through the cracks. I didn't believe any of this. Not truly. Not until I found the journal. Not until I read, page after page, the slow and deliberate campaigns waged against souls who thought they were simply living their lives. Until I realized how much of the world's sorrow, how much of its anger, how much of its despair was not just human frailty, but the fingerprints of something darker, something laughing behind the curtain. And yet, this is not a story of despair. If it were, I would have burned the journal the moment I realized what it was. I would have destroyed it, buried it, sealed it in concrete and salt. But I didn't. Because even in these pages, even in the rotted voice of one who delighted in destruction, there is a deeper truth. Grace is stronger. Always. Because every whisper of pride, every scheme of cruelty, every slow, careful attempt to pull a soul into the pit was answered. Maybe not with trumpets, maybe not with flashing swords and fire from the sky, but answered all the same. Answered in quiet prayers and whispered in broken bedrooms. Answered in hymns hummed through cracked lips. Answered in stubborn acts of mercy and unseen acts of faithfulness. Grace does not roar. It does not demand. It endures. It endures when evil exhausts itself screaming. It endures when demons rage themselves into dust. It endures when the darkness promises it will have the final word. And the final word is always, inevitably, mercy. What you are about to listen to is not a pleasant record. It is not comfortable. It is not sterile. It is a confession, a testament of what evil has tried and what it has failed to achieve. It is a reminder that even the strongest malice collapses under the silent weight of grace. I transcribed it not to glorify the darkness, but to testify to the light that endured beyond it. Listen carefully. Not because there is power in the pages themselves. There isn't. The power lies in remembering what they forgot. That no matter how long the night howls, the morning always comes. That no matter how fiercely evil rages, it cannot endure the weight of silence stronger than screams. That no matter how many battles are lost, the war was won before it ever began. You are not alone. You were never alone. Even here, even now. Especially now. Signed, Oliver. There's a theory, half philosophy, half faith, that no person is wholly good or wholly evil, that we are made of warring instincts, that light and shadow run down the center of every human heart. I've always believed that, still do, I think. But what we don't like to admit is how easily that line shifts. It doesn't take much. A disappointment, a silence, a private bitterness left to fester. One day you wake up and realize you've moved a few degrees off true north. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to call it a bad day. A season, a phase. And if you're not paying attention, that phase becomes the person you are. The devil doesn't knock on your front door. He doesn't have to. You leave it open for him when you're tired, distracted, or convinced you're fine. I wasn't looking for anything in particular when I found it. Just browsing. It was a Saturday, late spring. One of those neighborhood yard sales where time collapses and everything smells faintly of mildew. An old woman with soft hands told me her father had died the month before. Said he'd kept things no one had touched in decades. Books, letters, antiques. Some of it was junk. Some of it wasn't. The drawer caught my eye. Heavy oak. Carved faces on the handles. It looked old enough to remember war. I didn't even really need it, but something about it felt right. That I needed to have it. like it had secrets and it wanted me to ask. When I got it home, I found the false bottom almost immediately. A thin sheet of wood came loose with a knife. Beneath it, a journal, leather-bound, cold to the touch. Inside, I found page after page of careful, articulate, deeply troubling prose. The handwriting was elegant, not quite human. The journal belonged to something called Scriix. He calls himself a demon. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that these pages, however they came to be, contain the personal writings of something that claims to be in the employ of hell itself. A soul tempter, a bureaucrat in the infernal machine. The tone is difficult to explain. Part memoir, part performance review. He writes like a man balancing self-loathing with smugness. He brags about the people he's ruined, complains about his workload, mocks heaven and mocks us. I spent the last 3 months reading it, and now I'm transcribing it. Not for fame, not for validation, certainly not for entertainment. I wrote my thoughts in my own journal after finding this thing. I'll leave you with my thoughts at the end of each entry. Entry 1. Scriix's Journal. Unit 6B, Sin Allocation Department, Emotional Instability Division. It's easy to think of hell as chaos, screaming fire, endless torment, and sure, that's one version. But you want to know what real damnation looks like? Filing a 32-page audit to explain why the last soul you pushed into madness got snatched back at the 11th hour by some praying grandmother and a hospice chaplain. That's hell. We don't ask permission to tempt. That's human thinking. We act. We prod, we whisper. We place the bait. But after the fact, that's when the paperwork begins. Everything has to be tracked, justified, categorized, cross-referenced in triplicate, so we don't attract unnecessary attention from upstairs. We're allowed to twist the world. We're just not allowed to break the balance. I'm currently 5 reports behind, 3 audits overdue, and being investigated by oversight for excessive influence during peak prayer intervals. Whatever that means. The rules are elastic, until they aren't. And still somehow I have to turn numbers. And they don't say it, but they want quotas. Souls claimed, hearts bent, consciences dulled, preferably without the flare. Big flashy disasters, those get noticed. What they want now is the slow ruin, the quiet collapses. Men and women who fall apart at the seams while smiling in the mirror. I've worked here a long time. Not long by immortal standards, but long enough to know the politics here are as nasty as the job. Everyone's under pressure. Everyone's trying to claw up the ranks, or at least make sure someone else gets audited first. Veltrix from Sector C slept his way into a promotion. Now he oversees Despair Subdivision 3, even though he can't even corrupt a youth pastor with access to TikTok. Another demon, Krath, sabotaged my backlog last month. Deleted half my case history just to take credit for a suicide I spent weeks cultivating. It's not just sabotage. It's territorial. I specialize in emotional volatility. Rage, shame, inferiority. I study it. I sculpt it. But now, The lust department's trying to poach cross-send clients. They're pushing for more integrated cases. As if making a man cheat and spiral into depression is some kind of innovation. They forget. Rage is purer. It doesn't hide. It doesn't pretend to be pleasure. It just burns. Which brings me to my current subject. Gregory Finch, a middle manager, 42. Wife left him last year. Took the dog, the house, the better friends. What did he get? 2 new medications, a weekly therapy session he lies through, and a red stapler he hides in his desk so nobody else touches it. Ooh, he's seething. Quietly. All day. He thinks he's holding it together. He's not. I started small. Misdirected a few emails, glitched the elevator on his floor. Then came the whispers. They think you're weak. They're setting you up. You're the punchline at lunch. He started overcompensating. Showing up early, passive-aggressively offering to help others with their jobs, then watching their faces when they politely declined. Classic displacement. Easy to twist. I watched him rehearse a confrontation in the bathroom mirror. It was pathetic. Inspiring, really. 2 days ago, I bumped his internet connection during a remote meeting. Just enough to lag to make him talk over his manager. His eyes twitched. He laughed too loud to cover it. Nobody laughed with him. Today I pushed a little harder. A new hire spilled coffee on his desk. Gregory snapped, visibly. Voice raised, veins bulged. HR made a note. His boss asked him to take a walk. I whispered, "They're documenting you. They want you out. You are an expendable, angry, middle-aged liability." He sat in his car after work for 37 minutes. No music. Just that tight silence before a man punches his steering wheel and pretends it was about traffic. Tomorrow's the tipping point. If I've done this right, he'll interrupt someone in a meeting, or slam a door too loud. He'll do something small but final. Something that HR can use to justify what they've already decided. All I have to do now is keep the tension in his gut wound tight. He thinks he's in control. That's the best part. Humans always think they're steering the ship, even as they drill holes in the hole. My job is not to shove him over the edge. That's crude. My job is to make the edge look like solid ground. Of course, I'll have to submit a behavioral breakdown after the fact, cross-reference sin categories, tag relevant departments for long-term torment processing. You think they'd be grateful for quality damnation work. But no. I'll file my report, I'll get flagged for tone. They'll say I'm too hands-on, and Aldrich will find some way to slip his name into my file and take credit for the man's eventual breakdown. That's hell. And I'm still here. Signed, Scriix. Demon Class 4, Department of Emotional Instability, Division 6B. Currently pending internal review. Again. Here's my first response to entry 1. I don't know if I should be more disturbed by the content of this journal, or by how easy it is to follow. At first, I thought this was just a twisted piece of fiction, some niche creative writing exercise. But there's something too exact in the way this Scriix speaks. Too organized. I expected fire and brimstone. This reads more like internal memos from a failing corporation run by sociopaths, which I guess is exactly what it's describing. There's a tone here that feels almost human. Not in the moral sense. This thing is clearly not human in heart, but in behavior. The pettiness, the status obsession, the office rivalries, the spreadsheets. It mimics us. Or maybe we mimic it. I don't like how real Gregory feels. I don't know the man. He might not even exist. But I know men like him. I prayed with them, coached them, sat across from them in their church halls as they smiled and politely said, "I'm doing all right, thanks," when their hands were shaking and their marriages were on fire. And here's this demon, this Scriix, not tempting them with drugs or sex or violence, but with doubt, with silence, with just enough disruption to let a man spiral on his own. That's the most terrifying part of this entry. The demon doesn't create the fall. He just loosens the screws and lets gravity do the rest. It's surgical. Gregory Finch didn't explode. He eroded. And that makes me wonder, how many times have I mistaken erosion for endurance? I keep thinking of that line. My job is to make the edge look like solid ground. If that doesn't scare you, you're not paying attention. I don't know who you are, Scriix. I don't know if you're real or if someone like you wrote this as a warning or a trap. But I'm reading now, and I'll keep reading. Signed, Oliver. Entry 2. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. If there's one thing worse than the paperwork, it's the quotas. You'd think, being literal manifestations of evil, we'd be immune to things like productivity metrics and quarterly evaluations. But no. Hell is addicted to numbers. Souls lost, moral collapses finalized. Number of stumbles successfully weaponized into spirals. It all gets logged, tracked, compared, compensated, or punished. My performance file currently has 1 red flag and 2 under scrutiny tags. I've been summoned for quota review twice this cycle. You ever sat in a room of ancient, scowling supervisors while their projector cycles through PowerPoint slides of your failures, each marked with a little animated flame and sarcastic applause sound effects? My last review included this gem in my evaluation. Scriix demonstrates an excess of flair and a deficiency in closures. Recommend tighter follow-through and fewer existential monologues. Yeah, well, tighten this, Vorgath. They love to talk about team synergy right before they assign us to the cold room shifts. That's where they send the ones who miss their marks. Rooms that mimic the last 5 minutes of a soul slipping away from us. You just sit there, watch it in loop, knowing you failed to lock it down. I did 3 rotations in Cold Room 19 after that missionary in Calcutta started forgiving everyone who wronged her, even the man who assaulted her. Smiling, weeping, forgiving. It was disgusting. Beautiful, maybe, but mostly disgusting. So now I stay sharp. I keep files, I take notes. And sometimes, when things are particularly bleak and the politics too irritating, I remind myself of my best work. Let me tell you about a few of my favorites. Here's the husband who stopped listening. It began with small things. A grunt instead of a response. A delayed uh-huh when his wife talked. Not because he didn't love her. He still did. He prayed for her at night. They met at Bible college. Wore matching t-shirts on their honeymoon. Shared devotional time. But the years dulled the edge. She started correcting his stories when he told them. Small, factual details. It was a Thursday, not a Friday. He laughed it off at first. I added a whisper. She always has to have the last word. He was tired from work. Overloaded. Their kids were in 2 different schools. Bills stacking, no time for intimacy. So I kept nudging. She doesn't admire you anymore. She sees your limits. She's bored. One night, she was late from a parent-teacher conference. He didn't text, didn't call. When she walked in and said, "Sorry, they ran late," I helped his silence stretch into resentment. The next day, he came home and didn't speak at all. Within 2 months, their prayer time dried up. Their dinner conversations turned into logistics. By month 6, he was staying later at work. Not for the money, but to talk to Natalie in accounting. Natalie who laughed at his dumb jokes. Natalie who listened. He didn't cheat. He never touched her. But he stopped praying. That was the real break. He told himself, I'll get back to it once things settle down. They didn't. She filed for divorce 2 years later. Said she felt spiritually abandoned. He still insists he never did anything wrong. And you know what? He didn't. He just didn't do anything at all. And that was the art. Ooh, how about this? The pastor who loved the applause. He was 27 when he took over the church. The old pastor retired, left behind a sleepy, aging congregation. This kid brought light shows, acoustic covers, branded sermon series. This new pastor was electric and preached like he was on fire. Talked about God like he'd just spoken to him that morning. People came in droves. Youth groups exploded, Instagram clips went viral. And I was patient. I didn't try to ruin him. Not right away. I just echoed the applause. Every time someone said, "You're the reason I came back to church," I whispered, "You're the reason." He stopped citing scripture as often and he started quoting himself. He started watching the playback of his sermons, not to improve, but to relive the crowd's reaction. Then came the book deal. He prayed over it, said he wanted to expand the message. But what he really wanted was the stage. The branding agency, the 6-figure advance. I made sure the endorsements came from the right people. Big names, thin theology, wide smiles. He started adjusting his doctrine to keep them. He thought he was doing good. Still prayed, still preached. But by then, the word had hollowed him out. He was selling God as a lifestyle. He'd built an empire and called it ministry. And when it all crashed, when the affair leaked, the financial mismanagement hit the press, he wept, not for his soul, but for his brand. How about this one? The mother who meant well. She had 3 kids and a worn Bible. The leather was cracked from years of use. She prayed every morning at 5 a.m. before anyone else was awake. She loved God deeply, and she loved her children more than her own life. And that's exactly where I started. She wanted them safe. Safe from bad theology. Safe from worldly influence. Safe from heartbreak. I just made her afraid. Of everything. I used headlines, statistics, Christian Facebook groups full of half-baked conspiracies. When her daughter asked questions about faith, she panicked. Doubt, she thought, was the first step toward rebellion. I twisted her prayers into panic attacks. Every time one of her children failed, even in small ways, I whispered, "You're losing them. You didn't pray hard enough. You failed." She started forcing them to church events, removed every secular book from the house, took away phones, shut down friendships, called it protecting them. Her oldest left for college and never came back. The middle one stopped speaking to her after she found his hidden journal and burned it. The youngest told a friend, "I feel like I'm in prison." She died thinking she was a warrior for God. Well, years later, her children still flinch when someone says the word faith. I didn't need to make her evil. Just afraid. How about another? I call this one the philosopher who laughed. There's a certain breed of human I particularly enjoy working on. The kind that believes their intelligence is insulation. That because they can explain a thing, they're immune to it. Philosophy professors, specifically. They're delightful. This one, Dr. Nathaniel Lorne, was brilliant. Tenured at 34. Regular guest on debate panels. He'd written 3 books by the time he started teaching full-time. One of them, Faith as Folly, The Tyranny of Belief, sold over 100,000 copies and was quoted in 2 Supreme Court briefs. He was a man of order, a man of precision, a man who believed emotion was just a residue of the animal self. And he loved the sound of his own voice. I didn't need to give him anything new. I just amplified what was already there. Every time a student asked a sincere question about morality, I planted the same thought. They're only asking because they don't understand the question. The real win wasn't turning him atheist. He was already there. The win was turning him inward, making him worship his own conclusions, making him laugh at the idea that he could ever be wrong. I remember one lecture in particular. He was discussing the illusion of objective morality. A freshman raised her hand and asked timidly, "But if there's no higher standard, how do we know something is wrong?" He smiled, not kindly. He said, "We don't. We just agree on what we're willing to punish. And sometimes not even that." The class laughed, nervously, except the girl. She left after that semester, went home. Her church tried to encourage her, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I passed that case to another tempter. Team effort. Back to Nathaniel. In private, he was less arrogant. In the quiet, he had questions. He'd watch the news, see a child killed or a scandal erupt, and feel something twist in him. But then I'd remind him, there's no standard. You taught that. You proved it. Don't be sentimental now." And he nodded to himself, alone in his kitchen. Years passed. His marriage dissolved. Mutual incompatibility. His books grew thinner and more circular. His lectures more cynical. He stopped mentoring, stopped publishing. Eventually, he retired early. Said he was tired of performing philosophy for the ignorant. He lives alone now. Doesn't speak to his daughter. He says it's because she's regressed into dogma. She just wanted him to come to her baptism. His body is alive. His soul entombed in his own intellect. He doesn't laugh as much anymore, but he still thinks he's won. And that is why I have. Now here's another. The girl who measured her worth. Her name was Alina. 17, church kid, youth group leader. Played keys during worship. Soft-spoken, big heart, bigger eyes. The kind that looked like they were always hoping to be seen. She was raised right. Bibles at breakfast. Family prayers before bed. Her parents loved her, but they didn't understand her. Not really. They told her she was beautiful. But the world told her what beautiful meant, and she didn't see that in the mirror. I didn't come to her in fire. I came to her in filters. A little jealousy here, a little envy there. Social media was a buffet. Every girl thinner, prettier, bolder. Every boy chasing them and not her. I just whispered the same thing every time she scrolled. You'll never be enough until you are more. More makeup, more smiles, more exposure. Just a little more skin. After all, they were doing it and they got noticed. So she posted. Not all at once. Slowly. A new profile pic, a gym selfie, a photo in that dress she never wore to youth group. The likes came in, the comments followed. It felt good. Briefly. She started measuring her value by attention, then by comparison, then by guilt. And then came the double life. Church Alina prayed, apologized, rededicated. Online Alina curated, performed, craved. She felt torn, split, lukewarm, she called it. She tried to quit. Social media, the friends, the pressure. But she couldn't. Because I had convinced her that the false version of her was the only one people ever truly saw. The real her. That awkward girl in sweats, eyes tired from studying scripture, fingers shaking during late-night prayer. I made sure she believed no one could love that version. Eventually the guilt drowned her. She stopped coming to youth group and told herself she needed time to figure things out. Her Bible stayed on the nightstand unopened. And that's where I left her. Not burning, not raving, just numb. A shell of someone who once believed she was fearfully and wonderfully made. Scriix, closing monologue, entry 2. There's an elegance to quiet ruin. The world expects damnation to arrive in thunderclaps. Affairs, murders, public shame, the full collapse. But those are just fireworks for amateurs. My art is slow. My method is patience. I don't force the fall. I cultivate it. I water the cracks in the foundation until the house collapses under the weight of its own silence. These 5, they were beautiful. Not because they were spectacular, but because they were common. Everyday humans, churchgoers, thinkers, parents, lovers, and people who cried during worship songs and smiled at strangers. And all I had to do was let them keep doing what they were already doing. Just slightly more. A little more pride, a little more fear, a little more self. I've learned something working with this job. Most humans don't need to be dragged into hell. They just need to be left alone long enough to forget what heaven sounded like. They need a little nudge towards the mirror. A little encouragement to compare, to control, to cling. And once they do, once they start defining themselves by anything other than grace, they'll do the rest for me. They'll build their own chains. And here's the tragic comedy of it all. They'll call it freedom. They'll scream about choice, about self-expression, about finding their truth. As if those things will hold them when they're hollowed out and the silence comes knocking. Do you know how many of them still pray after they've lost the plot? Almost all of them. They don't stop believing. They just start believing wrong. They think God's disappointed in them, ashamed, gone, and so they retreat thinking they're being judged when really they're just judging themselves on my behalf. I don't have to lock the door. They do it for me. They think I win with sin when I win with distance. And when they finally fall, when the marriage ends or the platform crumbles or the soul simply quiets into a life of muted, self-sufficient despair, no one notices. No one pays attention. There's no explosion, no headline. Just another light going out. And I sit back. I file my report. I get no recognition, no promotion, no parade. Just another case closed. And that, I suppose, is the real reward. Because for all their preaching and pleading and hymns and hallelujahs, they never really believed someone like me could be so quiet. Signed, Scriix, Demon Class 4, still underappreciated. Oliver here. Reading this felt like staring at a predator through a pane of glass. You're safe, technically, but you still flinch when it moves. These stories, I want to say they're exaggerated, I want to say they're fiction, but they're too precise, too ordinary. It's the ordinariness that unsettles me. There's no fire and brimstone in Scriix's methods, no spinning heads or blood rituals. Just tired marriages, inflated egos, and silence where there should have been love. He doesn't break people, he lets them break themselves, one small compromise at a time. And I see it now. What he's actually proud of. Not the fall, but the forgetting. When the people he tempts forget who they are, who God is, and how they're held. That's the real work. But I also see something else. He underestimates us. He mocks our habits, our prayers, our fragility. And sure, we are fragile. I've lived long enough to know that. But he talks about grace like it's weak. Like it's a trick or a loophole. And that's where he's wrong. Grace doesn't excuse the fall, it interrupts it. It doesn't make sin irrelevant, it makes redemption possible. These people he corrupted, they weren't evil, they were tired, distracted and wounded, and yes, he played his part. But so much of this, so much, could have been interrupted by a single moment of humility. He calls our faith lukewarm. He says we build our own chains and call it freedom. But if that's true, then I'll gladly wear the chain that leads me back to truth. He watches from the dark and laughs when we stumble. But he forgets we aren't alone in the dark. God sees us too. And God never laughs when we rise. Signed, Oliver. Entry 3. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division, Scriix. Failure isn't the end here. You might think if a tempter loses a soul, they'd be demoted. Shredded, cast out. Not so. No, the real punishment is being made to watch. When a soul you cultivated and nursed toward despair, whispered to night after night, somehow staggers to their feet, dusts themselves off, and limps back toward the interferences camp, you don't get reassigned. You get tethered. You get to watch them climb out of the pit you built for them. You get to witness every weak, stuttering prayer, every trembling act of mercy, every stupid, beautiful, reckless act of hope they dared to commit after you ruined them. That's one of hell's versions of discipline. The records call it observational reassignment. I call it agony. One soul in particular still haunts me. Not because he was extraordinary. Quite the opposite. He was painfully, laughably small. Unremarkable in every way that mattered. His name was Michael Archer. Mid-50s, widow, accountant, balding and quiet. The sort of man no one would notice standing in a checkout line. Perfect, I thought. Soft clay. His wife died on a Thursday. Complications from a surgery that wasn't supposed to be risky. One minute she was teasing him about his shirt wrinkles. The next minute he was staring at a nurse who couldn't meet his eyes. Oh, it was so easy at first. The shock, the anger, the loneliness that gnawed at the edges of his mind like rats behind a wall. I didn't even have to speak. Just sat beside him as he lay awake at night, blinking at the ceiling, and let the silence sharpen. He stopped praying within a week, stopped going to church by the end of the month. He still moved, mechanically. Went to work, paid the bills, fed the cat. But he wasn't there anymore. Just an echo in a human body. I was already drafting my victory report. Already imagining the subtle, spiraling death of faith that would complete the job without ever having to make him do anything. Just be nothing. But then came the night. It was raining. The sort of heavy, endless rain that feels like the world's trying to drown itself. Michael was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a photograph of his wife. The cat was mewling by the back door. He didn't even move, just sat there. And then the stupid man opened his mouth and said 5 words I'll never forget. I miss you. Help me. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't a prayer recited from a hymnal. It wasn't even addressed properly. No dear Lord, no formal plea. Just a broken man saying something into the empty air. And the worst part? Someone heard him. I felt it. A ripple, a presence so clean and so sharp it burned. Not loud, not triumphant. Just there, quiet and unmovable. Michael wept. Not the angry, bitter tears I had been cultivating. These were different. Surrendering tears, surrendering without bargaining and without demands. He didn't ask for an explanation, he didn't demand justice, he just opened. And all of my carefully built walls, the lattice of grief and isolation I had constructed around his soul, cracked. The next morning, he dug his wife's Bible out of a donation box he had packed weeks earlier. He didn't read it well, didn't quote it, didn't understand half of it. But he held it. And somehow holding it was enough. It wasn't dramatic. There were no choirs or visions. Just a man remembering and fumbling towards hope. He started small. A word of thanks for a sunrise, a whispered blessing over his meals, a smile for a coworker who had been quietly mourning a divorce, a donation to a neighbor who lost his job. Each act was a nail in the coffin of my campaign, and I had to watch every one. I filed the loss report naturally, mandatory. 3 days of processing, endless recalibrations of failure metrics, a full audit of my technique. They determined I had shown excessive overconfidence and despair reinforcement without allowing sufficient space for humility to germinate. Can you believe that? Punished for underestimating grace. As if grace were a rule-bound substance that obeyed pattern recognition like any other sin vector. It isn't. It's chaos. The one force we can't fully predict or contain. It doesn't follow the logic of fear or anger or lust or pride. It doesn't require conditions to be optimal. It doesn't even need permission. It just erupts. One crack in the armor, one whisper in the dark, and all our work burns like dry paper. I hate it. I hate the unpredictability of it. The waste of careful planning. Most of all, I hate that it feels beautiful even when I watch it destroy everything I built. He lived another 15 years, alone mostly, quietly. But he didn't die empty, he died mid-prayer. Talking not to the photograph of his wife, but to the interference himself. Without bitterness and without fear. I wasn't allowed to interfere. Just to watch. And now, when I close my eyes, when the bureaucratic buzz of hell goes quiet for a moment, I still hear him. A whisper, a crack in the dark, and the whole edifice of damnation trembled. Disgusting. And yet I wonder how many more like him I've missed. Signed, Scriix. Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division. Probationary status. P.S. Oh, and by the way, I kind of lied when I said there wasn't punishment and torture. Once all the paperwork was filed, loss report triple stamped, audit notes returned, and my failure properly logged for eternity, I was treated to a more traditional punishment. Hell does love its little ironies. They locked me in a sensory chamber and looped the sound of Michael's last prayer. His real final one. The one just before his body gave out. It wasn't even dramatic. Just a few shaky words. Thank you. I'm ready now. These words played on repeat in his voice, whispered and sincere. For 300 hours. While I was chained to a desk made entirely of lost wedding rings and baby shoes from dead infants. Clever, isn't it? Every time I tried to tune it out, they lowered the volume just slightly, so I had to strain to hear it. So I had to choose to hear it. And I always did. That's the worst part. Curiosity is a curse we wear better than pride. So yes, observational reassignment is painful. But true torment is being forced to remember why we lost. And worst of all, why they were worth the fight in the first place. Barbed genius, really. Signed, Scriix. Oliver here. This one made me sit up straighter. Not in fear, but in something closer to reverence. It wasn't just the story, though Michael's story is the kind that quietly crushes you in the best way. It was how Scriix told it, how much it clearly cost him to write it. He tried to bury the pain under sarcasm and office gossip, but the truth leaked through. He lost, and it mattered. That's the part he doesn't want to admit. That's the part I don't think he fully understands. He spent weeks, months maybe, eroding that man's spirit brick by careful brick. And all it took him to undo it was a few words. That's not strategy, that's not eloquence or doctrine or theological accuracy. That's relationship. Raw, unfiltered, and real. The kind of prayer that doesn't care if it sounds holy because it's too busy being honest. And God heard it. The ripple Scriix described, that presence that burned, it wasn't flashy. It didn't arrive with a sword or a sermon. Just presence. And Scriix, for all his venom and bitterness, couldn't stop it. Couldn't compete with it. That gives me hope. More than hope, actually. It gives me clarity. The interference he talks about, my God, doesn't need grand gestures. He doesn't wait for perfect people. He meets the broken where they are and whispers back, I'm here. I've gotcha. Signed, Oliver. Entry 4, Scriix's Journal, Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. They imagine us with whips and chains, don't they? Mortals, I mean. When they think of hell, they picture the shrieking pits, the lakes of fire, the endless wailing of the damned under an iron sky. They think we all stand over the suffering, grinning, brandishing our instruments of torture. And they're not entirely wrong. Those places exist. The bleeding circles, the maw trenches, the womb of echoes, the weeping and gnashing of teeth. Real enough. There are still demons whose entire existence is dedicated to the artistry of physical and spiritual agony. They take pride in it. They build new torments like symphonies, always trying to outdo the last cycle's innovations. I used to be one of them, a long time ago. Oh, I served in the pit once. Fresh, ambitious, soaked in the screams of newly fallen souls. I learned to carve regret into a living memory. I could fashion a man's worst moment into a blade and make him wear it against his heart for eternity. But not anymore. I haven't touched a flailing soul in... I couldn't tell you how long. Time here is elastic, shifting, days stretch into decades or collapse into seconds. There's no sun to measure by, only the churn of quotas, failures, and endless reassignment. Now, I sit at a desk. I process cases. I managed the slow rot instead of the brutal collapse. Welcome to the other hell. Welcome to the offices. Endless miles of scorched black tile. Ceilings stitched from the shredded banners of fallen kingdoms. Cubicles formed from broken vows cracked like dry bones. Fluorescent lights overhead, always just a little too bright, always flickering at the edge of insanity. The buzzing never stops. Not loud enough to drown out thought, just sharp enough to make thinking hurt. We have departments, thousands of them, each specializing in a particular method of unraveling humanity. There's the Department of Emotional Instability, my post, responsible for subtle mood manipulations, resentment cultivation, and relational decay. There's manufactured doubts, crafting insecurity about faith, about worth, about purpose. Oh, social influence manipulation sector. They operate on a grander scale, steering culture itself, trends, ideologies, the slow corrosion of collective virtue into aesthetic branding. Oh, think that ice challenge thing, where people want to donate to charity, but to get out of it, they just douse themselves in a bucket of ice water and then just pass it on to the next without ever actually donating. You seeing the trend here? Oh, and let's not forget about aesthetic degradation, a personal favorite to laugh at. They specialize in the slow numbing of beauty, the dulling of music, the cheapening of art, the commodification of the soul's natural longing for transcendence. Oh, the symphonies they've destroyed in favor of jingles. Each department has its divisions, subdivisions, special task forces, and naturally, its quota enforcement units. Performance metrics are how we live and die. Every temptation planted must be documented. Case file number, target demographics, age, culture, spiritual background, sin vectors used, primary and secondary, time to yield or rejection, degree of internal damage inflicted. There are thresholds. Threshold 1, minor setback, mood alteration, surface level sins. Threshold 2, behavioral spiral, persistent vices, broken relationships. Threshold 3, full ruin, loss of faith, taking one's life, apostasy, despair. Move a soul to threshold 2 without escalation, commendation. Move them to threshold 3 without raising flags from the interference, promotional material. Screw up enough and cause a mass intervention from above. Yikes. Review, demotion, cold room duty, or worse, reassignment to the silent wards, where tempters are stripped of their voice and sentenced to watch the prayers of those they failed to destroy forever out of reach. We are not free. We are ranked, graded, and audited. We do not build, we do not create, we do not love, we compete. And every demon here knows that your rival would rather see you crushed under the weight of failed cases and lose an ounce of status themselves. Friendship in hell is measured in who kills you last. Which brings me to where I am now, hunched in my peeling leather chair, finalizing reports on souls I nearly lost, while Veltrix, sniveling parasitic Veltrix, plants sabotage in my records and slides closer to his next promotion. Hell isn't the pit. Hell is the office. Hell is every petty ambition you thought you could control, blooming in endless, gnawing, self-devouring eternity. And the worst part? No one's making us do it. We chose this. And every day we choose it again. You don't survive here by being good at your job. You survive by being worse to your peers than they are to you. Oh, I used to think otherwise. Back when I was fresh from the trenches, all ambition and sharp edges, I believed if I just worked harder, if I just delivered cleaner collapses, more efficient ruin, the promotions board would notice. Maybe I'd even get back to a frontline torment position, a real one, and not this endless parade of broken marriages and festering pride. Idiot. Skill doesn't matter here, numbers do, appearances do. Loyalty? Loyalty is a myth told to new hires before we drown them in memos and shove them into cubicles stitched from mortal despair. And it only took Aldrich to teach me that lesson properly. He's not smarter than me, not more ruthless, just more political. Knows how to coat his sabotage in enough deniability to avoid audit flags. Take the last case. A beautiful soul, ripe for ruin, Caleb Durand, 32, junior partner at a firm no one respects but everyone fears. Self-made, sharp-dressed, baptized in the gospel of ambition. He had all the right ingredients. Pride thick as tar, envy so subtle he mistook it for motivation, and a festering resentment of anyone luckier or happier than him. I've been working on him for months. I started small, whispering during board meetings, stoking the quiet rage every time someone else got credit. Planted the idea that he was overlooked, that he deserved more. Fed the fantasies of cutting corners, of stepping over colleagues he called friends after 2 beers. It was poetry. He was on the brink. A promotion within reach. A betrayal ready to bloom. Oh, I could almost taste the Threshold 3 report. I was already sketching out the phrasing. Client successfully escalated from resentment to betrayal, leading to career collapse, marital implosion, and significant spiritual disengagement. Promotion bait if I've ever seen it. Then Aldrich got involved. Did he swoop in with a dramatic temptation? No. No flash, no noise. He spammed Caleb's personal inbox with accident emails. Bible verses about patience, stories about forgiveness, clumsy, obvious morality tales. On the surface, nothing damning, no audit flags, just noise. Enough to nudge Caleb's mind off the track I'd been laying for months. Enough to force a crack of self-awareness where there should have been pure blind momentum. Caleb hesitated, started praying again. One night, drunk and confused, on the edge of making a career-ending betrayal, he pulled back, resigned from the firm instead, cried about it to his wife, asked forgiveness from colleagues he had planned to backstab. And just like that, my work unraveled. I had to file a failure reflection form. 3 rotations of paperwork, 8 mandatory counseling sessions with the Professional Remediation Bureau, the one staffed by demons who couldn't even successfully tend minor celebrities. Oh, and Aldrich. He logged a team assist credit for preventing an escalation event. He spun my sabotage into his success. No one cared. No one intervened. No one even asked. Because here, poaching isn't a scandal, it's a strategy. If you're not the one sabotaging someone else's climb, you're the one being sabotaged. And after that, I stopped playing by the old rules. I started planting false leads, falsifying case updates, reassigning lower priority human cases to rivals under my name to make them miss critical review deadlines? Sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly generous, I'll feed them bad intel. Hint that a soul is more susceptible to gluttony when really, it's poised to collapse through vanity. There's no point crying about it anymore. The offices don't reward loyalty, they reward survival. I don't trust any of them. Not Aldrich, not Craven from Discontent Subdivision, not Drith from Manufactured Doubts, not even Ruloth, who once covered a clerical error for me, only because he thought I'd owe him a favor later. Trust is currency here, and it's always counterfeit. The truth? Hell's hatred of humanity is nothing compared to the hatred we have for each other. Mortals think we're unified in evil, some great conspiracy of darkness. We're not. We're sharks in a pit, gnawing each other down to the bone, thinking if we just eat fast enough, maybe we won't be the next carcass. Maybe that's why the interference bothers us so much. It loves, it unifies, it redeems. We can't even comprehend it anymore. And so we hate it. And because we hate everything that even smells like it. Signed, Scriix. Hey everyone. Oliver here. I think I'm done transcribing for now. There's more. Much more. It was hard enough to get through this the first time I read it, let alone upload it all word by word myself. I'll get more to you later. Until then, stay safe. Don't listen to the whispers. And keep faith. It gets worse. Hey everyone, Oliver here back again. Fortunately or unfortunately. Hopefully, my first upload of this demonic journal wasn't enough to break you. It nearly did the first time I opened it for myself. This journal has been a hell of an experience, pardon the pun. Without any further ado, let's dive back in. Entry 5, Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. There's a reason pride is the keystone of damnation. It isn't because it's the loudest sin. It's not. Most humans don't strut about beating their chests, screaming their greatness into the skies. Not even the worst of them. Not anymore. No. Real pride is quieter, smarter. It wears humility like a mask. It baptizes itself in good deeds. It quotes scripture and says prayers and kneels in pews, all the while admiring the clean reflection of its own virtue. And that is why it's beautiful. You see, the interference's greatest weapon is relationship. Not damnation, not control. Relationship. That absurd offer of union without coercion. Intimacy without obliteration. It's the one thing that genuinely binds them to him. Pride is the perfect solvent. It doesn't tear the bond. It dries it out. Slowly, imperceptibly, until the thread of relationship snaps under its own brittle weight, and the human blinks in surprise, wondering why prayer feels like shouting into an empty room. Pride is clever that way. It tells them, You're strong now. You're wise now. You're righteous because you chose righteousness. You built this faith. You earned this character. You are good. And who would suspect sin when it tastes like self-improvement? When it feels like growth? Pride teaches them to see the interference not as the foundation of their worth, but as a sort of cosmic mentor they've outgrown. A nice thought. A ceremonial guest at the table they've set for themselves. And once that shift happens, once they start measuring their holiness by their performance rather than presence, we don't even have to touch them anymore. They'll ruin themselves. They'll chase applause while pretending it's for His glory. They'll serve causes and mistake it for serving the cross. They'll build kingdoms in their own name and etch His name at the base like a decorative plaque. And when the Halloween begins, when the applause fades, when the influence dwindles, when the platform cracks, they'll feel abandoned. They'll think He left them. They'll never suspect that they walked away, polishing their own reflection all the while. Pride is efficient. It makes repentance feel like annihilation, because to confess pride is to admit that you are not the architect of your goodness. And for most humans, that's a harder death than any blade or fire we could conjure. Pride is my favorite tool because it does not break them. It lets them build their own cage, bar by bar. Good intention by good intention. All without ever once thinking they were in danger. By the time they realize they're trapped, that their prayers are hollow, their service self-serving, their hearts dry and cracked, they don't run back to the interference. They run deeper into the mirror. They double down. They tell themselves it's just a dry season. They tell themselves more work, more service, more striving will reconnect them. And all the while I sit at my desk, filing my progress reports, watching the light dim by inches. Because pride is patient. It doesn't need a victory today. It can wait. And every day they admire their own virtue more than they admire their Creator is a day we win. Every once in a while, if you're paying attention, you spot a soul before the cracks appear. Ethan Wells was one of those. I first saw him from the Personal Rotations, a charity division candidate. Clean portfolio, no major scandals, no secret addictions. No rage hiding under a Sunday smile. He wasn't a low-hanging fruit. He was golden. Community pillar. Executive director of a half-dozen nonprofit efforts. Known for hosting prayer breakfasts, funding clean water initiatives, leading mission trips to third world countries where he smiled patiently at every camera flash like a saint waiting for canonization. A dangerous soul. The kind the interference often defends jealously. But the danger wasn't in how good he was. The danger was in how aware of his goodness he could become. You could smell it under the surface. Not vanity, not yet. Not loud. Nothing vulgar. but a subtle, simmering pride forming like plaque in the arteries of his spirit. That's all I needed. I spent 2 months just observing. He was disciplined, faithful, prayerful, but certain habits gave him away. The slight uptick in his pulse when a reporter asked for an interview, the way he scanned a crowd after a speech, searching for admiration before bowing his head humbly, the lingering resentment when a younger, flashier charity leader got more media attention. Tiny moments, barely detectable, but a seasoned hand knows. You don't look for the shout, you look for the flicker. And us seasoned, experienced demons are very, very acute to the small details. He prayed often, but increasingly the prayers shifted. Less about submission, more about impact. Less about faithfulness in small things, more about platform expansion. Ethan thought he was praying for more opportunities to serve. What he was really praying for was a bigger stage. And the interference in his maddening patience still answered some of those prayers. Not to build Ethan's brand, but because even corrupted service still feeds the hungry and shelters the lost. Infuriating. Still, it played into my hands. I began the nudging process in earnest, small thoughts at first. You're doing more for the kingdom than your entire congregation combined. Why shouldn't you be the face of this movement? You earned it. Maybe they're just jealous of your anointing. He never argued with the thoughts, never stopped to ask where they came from, just folded them into his internal monologue like seasoning into stew. That's the trick with pride. You don't introduce it like a new flavor. You slip it in until it tastes like something they've always been cooking. By the time Ethan was scheduling meetings with his social media consultants to expand the reach of the ministry, I knew the hook was set. And it was set deep. There's no thrill quite like watching a soul turn slowly toward the mirror, believing they're looking into the eyes of God. The charity gala was held on a Friday night in late autumn. One of those events where the air practically crackled with self-satisfaction. Smiles polished for cameras, tuxedos rented for the illusion of humility, 1,000 attendees, 1,000 cell phones broadcasting servant-hearted generosity into curated social feeds. The perfect altar for a slow sacrifice. Ethan had been chosen as a keynote speaker, naturally. He didn't ask for the honor. He demurred politely when invited. But I saw the way his fingers trembled slightly when he read the invitation. Excitement dressed in Sunday clothes. He spent 2 weeks preparing his speech. Not in prayer, not in searching the scriptures, but in combing through past sermons, past interviews, past applause lines that landed well. In fine-tuning the phrases he knew would draw standing ovations, would coax tears without ever fully stepping out of the sunlight. He told himself it was for the cause. That's the lie pride always tells at first. It's not about me. The night of the event, he wore a navy suit, tailored to just barely suggest that he didn't care about being seen. He stood backstage, pacing, whispering verses under his breath, not because he was afraid he'd fail, but because he was afraid he wouldn't be admired enough. When his name was announced, he stepped onto the stage, bathed in soft golden light. The screen behind him displayed a slideshow of clean water wells and smiling children from distant continents, all framed beneath the logo of his organization, his life's work. And then he spoke. He spoke of humility, of service, of unseen sacrifices, and of the sacred honor of lifting up the forgotten. The crowd lapped it up. Every carefully crafted pause, every manufactured anecdote, every polished tear glistening in the corner of his eye. And when he finished, when he uttered the final words, "May we decrease so he might increase," the room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, but worshipful. The kind that rolls like thunder, makes the chandeliers tremble, fills the air like a tangible force. Ethan stood there, blinking and smiling that carefully humble smile. And that's when I moved. Not a shove, but just a whisper. They love you more than they love the mission, more than they love the interference, more than they love anything else right now. And you made that happen. You. He didn't fight it, didn't blink it away. He drank it like wine. The applause was still rolling over him, a living thing, a golden tide. And in that moment, a seed anchored itself in his soul. Not in rebellion, not in malice, but in satisfaction. He wasn't serving anymore. He was being served. He left the stage to a standing ovation. He shook hands, he smiled for pictures. He nodded sagely as local politicians thanked him for his vision. He didn't notice the way his prayers changed that night. How the thanks became thinner. How the gratitude became assumption. How the surrender became strategy. After the gala, he went home alone, stood in his quiet kitchen, and took off his jacket, and poured a glass of bourbon. Not in celebration, but in ritual. And as he raised the glass to his lips, he thought, without irony and without guilt, I deserve this. Not because of grace, not because of blessing, but because of himself. And that was the moment. Not dramatic, not visible to anyone but me. A single silent slip of the soul into itself. Pride doesn't make a loud noise when it claims a heart. It makes a soft, velvet click, like a key turning in a door. And the best part? He'll keep doing good. He'll keep building wells, he'll keep funding shelters, he'll keep quoting scripture and attending prayer breakfasts. But the center will be gone, hollowed out. And when the weight of praise finally collapses inward, when the audience thins and the applause fades, he'll find that he's standing in an empty room, applauding himself. And I'll be there, filing my report, smiling, as always. Scriix, Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division, Architect of Silent Ruin. P.S. There's no artistry in chaos. Any brute can cause a scandal, any fool can shatter a life with brute force. But to make a soul bend, gently, willingly, until it smiles while binding its own hands, that's the real work. Collapse is easy. Corrosion is beautiful. And pride? True pride is the masterpiece that signs itself. Scriix. This one hit harder than I want to admit. It's not the corruption of Ethan Wells that shakes me. It's how ordinary it is. Ethan didn't fall because he rebelled. He didn't fall because he cursed God or abandoned the church or plunged into scandal. He fell because he let himself be admired. He fell because he forgot, just a little, just for a moment, who gave him everything he had. And I see myself in that, more than I'm comfortable admitting. Every time someone praises a lesson I taught, every time someone thanks me for my example, there's a flicker inside me. A flicker that says, maybe you're better than you think. Maybe you're doing all right on your own. I've called it encouragement. I've called it affirmation. I've even thanked God for it, and meant it mostly. But there's something else buried underneath. Something that leans a little closer to the mirror than it should. I thought temptation would come dressed in rage, lust, and hatred. I didn't think it would come in the form of a well-ordered compliment. I didn't think it would sound like applause. And now I'm wondering how many steps I've already taken without realizing it. I'm still standing, still praying, still anchored, but tonight after reading this, I'm not sure how tightly I'm holding on. Or how tightly I'm being held. Oliver. Entry 6. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. You would think, given the nature of our work, that promotions in hell would be earned by merit, by results, by the slow and exquisite ruin of mortal souls. Wrong. Promotions here are earned by proximity. Who you sabotage, who you impress during quarterly audits, whose failures you leak to oversight just quickly enough to pretend you stumbled across a concern. Competence isn't rewarded. Noise is. Take Drelvoth. Drelvoth, patron saint of PowerPoints, architect of atrocities in administrative form. The demon who once tried to classify sarcasm as an independent sin vector because he thought it would make quarterly reporting look trendier. Drelvoth has never successfully collapsed a soul without assistance. His career portfolio looks like a graveyard of half-assed apostasy cases and abandoned despair spirals. He couldn't ruin a minor politician on his best day with a backwind. But he talks well. He smiles during performance reviews. He drops terms like cross-sector synergy and integrated sin scaffolding. He calls meetings touch points. He wears metaphorical lanyards. And so, naturally, when Hell decided it was time to modernize our methods, because Heaven's numbers were ticking up again, and nothing terrifies the middle management hierarchy like even a whiff of revival, they didn't consult tempters. They didn't pull the grunts from the cubicles who actually dirty their claws. They asked Drelvoth, and he gave them exactly what they deserved. He gave us the algorithm, a predictive soul management system designed to preemptively identify susceptibility patterns across the mortal plane. They called it the future of temptation. I call it the single greatest strategic blunder since someone proposed the idea that humans would damn themselves more efficiently if we just stopped talking to them altogether. The algorithm's launch was announced with great fanfare. There were banners made from recycled failure reports. There was a mandatory 2-day seminar. There was even a promotional video, narrated by a deep, gravelly voice explaining how integrated temptation automation will revolutionize soul harvest by 2040, I sat through the whole thing. I watched the pie charts dance. I listened to Drellvoss' grating voice drone on about projected fall potentials and behavioral deviation trends. I endured breakout sessions where lesser demons earnestly discussed how machine learning could optimize a timeline from temptation to spiritual entropy. And I smiled, because I knew it would fail. You cannot predict a soul. You cannot chart grace on a spreadsheet. You cannot measure the tensile strength of free will using statistical regression models. But they believed. They believed they could turn damnation into a numbers game. That with enough data, enough metrics, enough buzzwords, they could sidestep the messy, inefficient work of whispering into the cracks of a heart. Idiots. Of course, they rolled it out anyway. Of course, they mandated its use. And of course, it backfired spectacularly. But I'll get to that soon. First, a few more words about Drellvoss and the charming tragedy of trusting a demon who's never dirtied his hands with the soul's collapse to streamline damnation. Because if there's one thing a hell loves more than failure, it's institutionalizing it. The first cracks in Drellvoss' precious algorithm didn't take long to show. I remember the moment perfectly, because it was beautiful. Case 19877A. A mid-level accountant flagged as high susceptibility to wrath-induced collapse. The algorithm's profile said it was sterile precision, elevated frustration markers, increased cortisol response in traffic settings, documented history of verbal escalation during minor workplace disputes. In other words, ripe. The assigned tempter, a middling wretch from minor temptation subdivision named Krith, got the green light to execute a rage trigger escalation protocol. Simple plan. Push a few traffic irritations, bump a couple of passive-aggressive comments at work, tip the man into a screaming fit at his boss, costing him his job, and spiraling him into bitterness. Child's play. So Krith goes to work. Minor interventions at first. Textbook pressure building. And then came the coup de grace. A carefully staged highway delay. Construction zone, bottleneck traffic, drivers cutting him off left and right. According to the algorithm, this was where he was supposed to snap. Rage-induced incident, shouting, maybe a physical altercation, police record spiral initiated. But what happened instead? The man took a deep breath, turned up the radio, smiled at that car that cut him off, pulled him to the shoulder, and spent 15 minutes writing a thank you letter to his wife for packing his lunch that morning. A thank you letter! While Krith, invisible in the passenger seat, was practically vibrating with rage. And it didn't end there. By the next month, the man, now identified in the reports as one Gerald Marks, had organized a Kindness Drives Kindness initiative at his church, encouraging small acts of patience and grace during commutes. He turned our escalation event into a charity movement. They printed bumper stickers. They got a segment on the local news. Krith filed a failure reflection form so drenched in self-pity that I printed a copy just to laugh at during mandatory optimization seminars. The interference must have been grinning, because we who had meticulously crafted a rage trigger scenario, had, through the wonders of automation, orchestrated a kindness revival instead. The algorithm, naturally, flagged the event as minor deviation, unexpected positive outcome. No apology, no audit. Just a polite suggestion that perhaps Gerald's sin resonance quotient had been overestimated due to unmeasured latent spiritual variables. Which is the algorithm's way of saying, we have no idea why he didn't crack. Please continue pretending we know that we know what we're doing. Idiots. The next glorious failure came barely a cycle later. It was part of what Drelvo's team called the Faith Fracture Initiative, an absurdly optimistic attempt to use mass data points to trigger coordinated waves of spiritual doubt across multiple sectors. The algorithm's theory was simple. Humans are herd creatures. If enough latent doubts were seated in a particular geographic or social cluster, the contagion effect would take hold. One doubt would ignite another, and soon, you'd have entire churches hollowed out without ever needing to send a single senior demon to supervise. In theory, elegant. In practice, catastrophic. The target this time was a mid-sized town in the American Midwest. Heavy church presence, decent pockets of spiritual resilience, but just enough modern distractions to make the algorithm's metrics light up like a feast day bonfire. We were instructed to synchronize our efforts, whisper doubts during commutes, seed distractions before Bible studies, stir cynicism during sermons, encourage casual spiritual fatigue through 1,000 tiny interruptions. It was supposed to culminate in a gradual mass disengagement. Small first, less prayer, less worship, then bigger, skepticism towards leaders, disillusionment with God himself. The launch date was set, the subroutines deployed. The first week, everything seemed promising. Church attendance dropped by 3%. 2 Bible study groups disbanded citing scheduling conflicts. A few promising seeds of resentment sprouted in leadership meetings. Drelvoth practically preened during strategy updates. Trend lines indicate accelerated disengagement patterns, he crooned at the assembly, his voice thick with smugness. Projected complete spiritual atrophy within 18 local cycles. I wanted to throttle him with his own slide projector, because none of the tempters who actually knew the field, had been consulted on the tiny, inconvenient reality about humans. They fight back better when you make them bleed together. See, the problem with coordinated attacks, the problem with making suffering obvious, is that humans aren't just cattle. When they realize they're being pulled under, they tend to link arms, shout prayers into the void, and refuse to drown alone. And that's exactly what happened. The local church leaders, sensing a heaviness, a spiritual fog, did what the interference has trained them to do since the dawn of man. They prayed. The Sunday after the campaign began, instead of empty pews, the churches filled beyond capacity. Standing room only, teenagers weeping at the altar, hard men with arms like tree trunks kneeling and blubbering like children, mothers dragging entire families to the front to dedicate their homes anew. It was, and I say this with no small amount of nausea, one of the most effective revivals that town had seen in 3 generations, all triggered by our algorithmic meddling. I filed 3 separate protest memos. I attached detailed graphs showing correlation between overt doubt campaigns and increased spiritual solidarity. I even proposed an immediate suspension of centralized faith fracture initiatives pending field reevaluation. But no, Drelvoth brushed it off in the next oversight briefing. Anomalous counter effect. No significant system failure detected. Recommended persistence with adjusted message saturation rates. Which, translated from bureaucratic cowardice, means we refused to admit we set the building on fire and handed out free marshmallows. Meanwhile, I had to spend 2 months cleaning up the backblast, redirecting tempters, reassigning cases, trying to individually pick off the few stragglers too exhausted to stay in the revival's afterglow. Do you know how much harder it is to corrupt someone who's tasted real joy? It's like trying to unring a bell that has cracked the sky. And all of it, the whole damned failure, because some bloated bureaucrat thought you could herd souls like cattle with a spreadsheet and a marketing campaign. Idiots. Absolute raging idiots. And by the third time the major disaster hit, some of us weren't even angry anymore. There's a level of incompetence so pure, so transcendent, that it stops being frustrating and becomes almost musical. I would have clapped if clapping wasn't flat as disruptive behavior on floor 19. The target this time? A rising social media fitness influencer named Brielle Vasquez. The algorithm flagged her with a high gluttony susceptibility index based on her content history. Endless posts about food, meal plans, cheat days, protein shakes, glowing burger reviews between glossy selfies at the gym. Textbook. According to the metrics. Big potential fall. Public binge. Emotional breakdown. Career collapse. Humiliation spiral into despair. Perfect raw material for long-term self-loathing exploitation. The kind of win you could package for quarterly reports with a bow on top. I remember the assigned tempter, a simpering little creature named Scriix, barely 2 centuries old, practically salivating over the opportunity. He had a full plan. Subtly encourage her cheat days to spiral, amplify insecurities with carefully nudged comments, feed exhaustion with whispered indulgence, get her to slip, just once publicly. From there, the collapse would snowball. Simple. Except, Scriix never bothered to watch Brielle closely. He never bothered to listen beyond the metrics. Because if he had, he would have noticed. Anyone with 2 functioning neurons could have noticed that Brielle's so-called food obsession wasn't about personal indulgence at all. It was her ministry. Every cheat meal review was tagged with prayers for those who struggled with disordered eating. Every meal prep video was laced with quiet, persistent encouragements about stewardship, discipline, and gratitude. Every post about self-image was stitched together with confessions of her own past battles, how faith, not vanity, pulled her from the pit of self-hatred. She wasn't promoting gluttony. She was dismantling it. She wasn't worshipping food, she was weaponizing it against despair. And so, predictably, laughably, beautifully, the more Scriix whispered indulgence into her mind, the more she prayed. The more he sowed seeds of fatigue and self-doubt. The more she posted devotionals about reliance on the interference's strength and weakness. The big public collapse the algorithm anticipated? It happened, sure. Only it wasn't a scandal, it was an altar call. Scriix panicked, tried to flood her with louder whispers, tried to spin the moment into self-pity. It didn't matter. She prayed, thousands watched, thousands messaged, and thousands recommitted to treating their bodies as temples, not trophies. It was a rout. An absolute bloodbath. Except the blood wasn't hers, it was ours. By the time the reports hit oversight, the only salvageable spin was to mark the event as a localized faith anomaly impact at regional levels. The collapse came faster than I expected. It didn't happen with a grand announcement or a public spectacle. No, this is hell. We don't offer courtesy even in execution. One morning, we arrived at the offices to find the optimization terminals dark, the daily quotas suspended, the endless target enhancement reports deleted from the system with no warning. No explanation, no apology. Just a single memo, printed on scorched parchment, and tacked crookedly to the division bulletin boards. The algorithm initiative has been discontinued. Future temptation strategies will resume under individual discretion and oversight. Thank you for your participation. Efficiency is everyone's responsibility. The understatement of the century. I heard rumors before the day ended. The kind of rumors that don't need official confirmation because you can smell the blood in the air. Drelvoth was summoned to the 9th Review Courts. Not privately, not discreetly, but dragged, still clutching his presentation scrolls and auto-generated datasheets, down the central corridors of oversight, forced to walk past every demon who had ever wasted hours of their existence sitting through his seminars. Some spat, some jeered, some just watched silently, savoring every flinch, every desperate glance. I wasn't there, but I have reliable sources who described it beautifully. He was made to stand in the ashen dock, shackled in chains made from shredded failure reports, heavy and clinking with every whimper. His failures, the accountant, the revival, the influencer, and dozens more, were read aloud slowly, each one like a bell toll marking his death knell. His defenses, the charge, the graphs, the saturation rates, were laughed out of the court by demons so ancient their laughter sounds like the cracking of dry bones. When it was over, they stripped him of his titles, his division, and his rank. Oh, and his tongue. He's a mute now, assigned to data reconciliation in Cold Case Ward 17, where he'll spend the next several centuries manually cataloging souls he never touched, whispering their names into empty ledgers no one will ever read. A living footnote. A bureaucratic ghost, still breathing technically, but not alive, not where it matters. And I watched all of this by the upper galleries. I didn't jeer, I didn't spit, I didn't even smile. I simply stood, arms folded, and let him see me. Let him see that someone remembered the stink of his ambition and the hollow weight of his empty victories. He wanted to automate damnation. Now, he is automation. A cautionary tale carved into the underbelly of hell's history. And the best part, no one will bother to remember why he fell. They'll just file him away, another error logged, another warning stapled to the next fool who thinks systems can replace art. Because damnation, real damnation, isn't efficient. It's slow, it's messy, it's personal, and it always will be. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. The old way. The only way that ever mattered. One whisper, one crack, one soul at a time. Scriix, Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division. Very much still here. Oh, P.S. If you want to ruin a soul properly, you can't click download results. You have to bleed with them until they forget they were ever whole. I expected more. After all the stories you hear about hell, all the sermons, all the fire and brimstone, I expected something grander, something fearsome, something that would make me tremble. But instead, I, Oliver, get this. A broken office, a failed program, demons stabbing each other in the back over metrics and memos like petty middle managers. It's almost funny if it weren't so sad. They talk about damnation like it's inevitable, like it's a great and terrible machine grinding the world into dust, but in truth it's a mess. A clumsy, backbiting, pitiful mess. It's not terror that keeps them going. It's pride, insecurity, desperation to look competent in front of whatever sorry tribunal of cowards is currently handing out punishments. They're not running an empire down there. They're running a failing business. And maybe that's the most dangerous part of all. Not because they're invincible, but because they're so persistent in their failure. Because they'll keep clawing, keep whispering, keep sabotaging, even as everything around them collapses. Evil doesn't need to win spectacularly. It just needs you to think it's not worth fighting. I'm still standing. I'm not impressed, but I'm not laughing either. Because a machine doesn't have to be well built to grind you down if you stop paying attention. Oliver. Entry 7. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. After the dust settles, after the reforms collapse, after the strategists fall, after the efficiency experts get reassigned to their little paper purgatories, there is always a return to the old way. The only way that ever mattered. One soul at a time, one slow bending, one crack invisible to the human eye, widening day by day until the foundation collapses beneath its own forgotten weight. No metrics, no committees. No banners stitched from burned-out failure reports. Just a whisper and a willing ear. It's almost quaint now, almost old-fashioned to believe in the manual. Patient erosion of a soul. But the truth remains, etched deeper than any new initiative can erase. You cannot mass-produce damnation, you must cultivate it. Tenderly, carefully, like a vintner tending poison grapes. You have to know their dreams. You have to taste their fears. You have to understand what they love, and precisely how to turn it against them. That kind of work doesn't get flashy awards at oversight. It doesn't result in flashy quarterly metrics, but it endures. It endures when the committees fail, when the campaigns falter, when the glorious new systems burn under the weight of their own stupidity. It endures because human souls, for all their posturing, are still painfully simple. They are built for love. And if you know how to sour that love, if you know how to tilt the heart just slightly inward, just slightly away from surrender and towards self-reliance, they'll do the rest of the work for you. I don't need to create new evils. I just need to encourage old habits until they fester. A little pride, a little exhaustion, a little loneliness no one wants to admit. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just slow and steady. I've selected a new project to begin now that the algorithm has been put out of its well-deserved misery. Someone quiet, someone diligent. Someone almost invisible in the scope of the world, but whose fall, if properly coaxed, will echo wider than anyone expects. Her name is Sarah Clark, and already I can feel the weight in her shoulders when she thinks no one is watching. Already I can smell the faint, bitter curl of unspoken resentment, the ache of prayers she's too tired to finish. Already, she's starting to mistake her exhaustion for a personal failure. Perfect. Utterly perfect. I intend to hollow her carefully. No grand temptations, no fireworks, no scandal. Just a little more fatigue each day. A little more guilt, a little more isolation. Until she becomes a smiling corpse, clapping politely in pews, while her heart withers and forgets why it will ever beat in the first place. That's the real craft. Sarah Clark, the kind of soul the interference seems to favor, small, unnoticed, stubborn in her goodness. There's no platform, no book deal, no carefully curated public persona. Just late nights volunteering at the shelter when no one else signs up. Just worn hands writing notes of encouragement to shut-ins who haven't been to church in years. Just quiet prayers, whispered into a cracked steering wheel during commutes when the weight of another impossible day presses down on her chest. She's not perfect, not the fragile, squeaky clean image some mortals like to pin to their saints. She snaps sometimes. She glares at rude coworkers. She covets easier lies when she thinks no one is watching. She lies awake wondering if she matters at all. And still she moves forward, bleeding herself out in 1,000 small kindnesses no one will ever clap for. And therein lies her weakness. Not ambition, not vanity, but the slow, relentless grinding of unrelieved burden. Sarah's entire existence is built on the belief that she must hold everything together. That if she lets go, even for a moment, the fragile world around her will collapse and it will be her fault. She carries her faith like an overstuffed pack across a desert. Gratitude in one pocket, guilt in the other. Neither quite balancing out the weight. And what's worse, she thinks that's what holiness looks like. She thinks that dragging herself to the altar week after week, too tired to cry, too worn to feel anything but numbness, is some kind of offering. The interference calls it perseverance. I call it an opportunity. She is a structure already strained under its own devotion. All I need to do is apply the pressure to the right points. Nothing obvious, nothing that would cause alarm. Just small whispers, you're failing them, you're not enough, everyone handles it better than you. If you were stronger or holier, you wouldn't feel so tired. Let the guilt ferment. Let the shame blossom quietly behind her ribs. Let the isolation deepen until reaching for help feels like failure itself. Soon she'll stop praying for strength. She'll start apologizing for her existence. And when that shift happens, when she confesses, not sins of commission but sins of being insufficient, I'll know the rot has reached the core. She won't leave the church. She won't renounce her faith. No, better than that. She'll keep showing up. Smiling, serving, giving until there's nothing left. A hollow saint, propped up by a duty dead behind her eyes. And the world will call it endurance. And I will call it victory. Because you don't always have to break a soul to win. Sometimes, all you have to do is convince them they were never enough to begin with. The most beautiful ruin isn't loud, it doesn't shout. It doesn't crash through stained glass or tear up altar rails. It sighs. It exhales one last tired prayer into an empty room. It folds itself neatly into routine, into obligation, into a smile stretched too thin over an exhausted heart. And no one notices the day it stops beating. No songs are sung for the saints who rot quietly. No angels descend for the soldiers who bleed out in silence. And that is why I love this work. Because when the dust settles, and the pews empty and the candles gutter out in dusty chapels, it will not be rebellion that claimed them. It will be the slow death of those who thought they could carry the cross alone. Scriix. This one lingered. Not because of the malice, but because of the familiarity. I know people like Sarah. I've sat beside them, prayed with them, watched them force tired smiles and say, "I'm fine," when the weight is crushing them. Good people. Faithful people. People who think carrying the world on their shoulders is the price of loving it. And I, Oliver, wonder how many of them are collapsing and we never notice. How many are dying inside while we praise their perseverance and mistake exhaustion for endurance? Scriix is right about one thing. The strongest don't fall from pride. They fall because they think they have to be strong all the time. I'm not shaken in my faith tonight, but I am grieving. Grieving for every tired soul clinging to a fraying rope, thinking no one would care if they let go. And I'm praying tonight, not just for myself, but for the ones who can't pray anymore. Oliver. Entry 8. I had her. Sarah Clark was mine. I had laid every stone in the road to her collapse. I had hollowed her slowly, meticulously, until even the echoes inside her prayers had gone silent. I had watched the guilt ferment behind her smile. I had catalogued her every whispered fear, every exhausted confession that slipped between her clenched teeth at night. She wasn't fighting anymore. She wasn't even reaching. She was a house abandoned by its master. Lights off, doors unlocked, rafters rotting quietly under the weight of good intentions and unmet expectations. One more nudge. One final whisper. That was all that remained. And then, without warning, without permission, the interference moved. It wasn't dramatic. There were no lightning bolts hurled from high places. No radiant choirs peeling the heavens open to drag her away. No, it was worse than that. It was small, it was simple, it was irrevocable. I felt it the moment it happened, like a single hairline crack racing through the entire edifice I had built. She was sitting alone in her car late at night, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles bleached white. I was there. I was ready. I had whispered the final thought. "You're a burden. You're wasting everyone's time. Even he must be tired of carrying you." It should have sealed her. Instead, she looked up to the night sky and saw a beautiful shooting star streaking across it in a dazzling array of colors. The beauty in that moment changed something inside her. It brought down the walls that I had built up around her. She saw the shooting star as a sign to keep on, and I felt the ground shift under my feet. The next morning she prayed, just 5 broken words whispered into the stale air of her kitchen. "Help me. I'm so tired." And something answered. Something clean. Something terrifying. A presence. Not an earthquake, but an immovable weight of peace that settled over her bones. Not a single part of it needed her to be stronger, not a single part of it demanded penance, it just was. It met her exactly where she collapsed, and all my carefully cultivated rot, the self-loathing, the guilt, the slow starvation of hope, it burned away like paper held to flame. She didn't rise up soaring, she just breathed differently. And I knew with a certainty colder than iron that I had lost her. That is what stings the most. We are creatures born from failure. Our existence is one long testament to what happens when defiance curdles into futility. But what sears is how little it mattered. How all that careful planning, all the whispered doubts, it all crumbled without effort, without fanfare, without even the dignity of opposition. The interference didn't meet my attack with a counterattack. It didn't summon some radiant champion to do battle in the skies above her head. It didn't tear the world apart with thunder to rescue her from the snare I built piece by piece. It simply moved, effortlessly, inevitably like a tide. It brushed past all my traps, all my rot, all my meticulous sabotage, and swept her heart clean, as if I had never touched it. And worse, far worse, it didn't even deign to announce itself. No voice from the clouds, no sword drawn from the heavens, no flashing vision to blind her eyes. Just a whisper somewhere beneath the surface of her exhausted soul, "I am still here." And that was enough. That whisper crushed my entire operation. That whisper uprooted every seed of doubt I had planted with such care. That whisper snapped the chains I had so lovingly wrapped around her wrists before they could even cinch tight. They don't even bother to show themselves most of the time. No spectacle, no parade of angels, no glorious cavalry charge. They don't need to. They let us work. They let us sweat and bleed and scheme. They let us dig graves with our own bare hands, laughing, we think, because surely no rescue is coming. And then at the last moment, when they feel the time is right, when the soul is right, when the fall is seconds away, they whisper, they breathe, and everything we built falls apart like it was never real to begin with. Do you know what it feels to realize that? To realize you are not even an enemy worth facing directly? To realize your very best efforts, your proudest architectures of despair, can be unmade by a single glance from a God who doesn't even lift his voice? It isn't defeat. It is irrelevance. And that is the greater wound. That is the punishment beneath the punishment. We are not just beaten, we are ignored, dismissed like shadows before the rising sun, and we rage, and we claw, and we vow we will do better, be cleverer, be more ruthless. But it changes nothing, because the interference is not fighting us. The interference does not have to fight. It simply is, it always has been, and it always will be. And the best we can do, the very best we can hope for, is to keep nibbling at the edges of creation, knowing full well we are gnawing at something that will never break. We cannot win, we can only spite, we can only rot, and we can only ruin whatever small corners we are permitted to soil until the final, unshakable reality swallows us whole. There is no glory here, there is no triumph. There is only the long, grinding futility of rebellion without hope. And tonight, the weight of that futility presses down heavier than usual because one girl, sitting alone in a cheap kitchen chair, whispered 5 broken words, and the kingdom answered her as if she were the only soul that ever mattered, while I, for all of my efforts, for all my rage, for all my craft, am left whispering into the void. Signed, Scriix. Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division, irrelevant and still breathing. Oliver here. I had to sit with this one for a long time. I didn't race to write something down. I didn't want to rush past what this meant. Because for all the venom and despair dripping from Scriix's words, something shone through clearer than anything else he's ever confessed. Heaven answered, not because Sarah was strong, not because she fought hard enough, not because she earned rescue, but because she cried out. And the answer came, not in spectacle, but in a whisper, a breath. Something so small it could have been missed. Unless you were looking through the eyes of a demon who knows what real defeat feels like. That changes something in me. I've spent years praying prayers that sometimes felt like echoes bouncing off the ceiling. Prayers that never seemed to stir the air, let alone the heavens. Prayers where silence was the only response. But maybe the silence isn't the absence of God. Maybe it's the silence of presence too vast, too patient, too deliberate to announce itself like a trumpet blast. Maybe the prayers that feel unanswered are being answered, just not on the terms I demanded. Maybe the rescue is happening in the quiet, right beneath the surface, too subtle for me to measure. And maybe that's the mercy I keep missing, that God is not in the earthquake or the fire or the raging storm. He is in the still, small voice. And that is enough. Scriix's rage was meant to poison, but tonight it purifies. It reminds me that I don't have to see the hand moving the world to trust that it moves. That the silence I fear is not abandonment. It's the sound of a whisper stronger than every scream hell could ever muster. Sarah's story could have ended in despair, and by all human measure it should have. But a simple broken prayer cracked the walls wide open. And if it was enough for her, it's enough for me. I am still standing, but tonight, I'm not standing alone. And now I realize, I never was. Signed, Oliver. Entry 9. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. There was a time when damnation was simpler. No metrics, no optimization campaigns, no mass targeting. Just one soul, one slow, patient ruin. You could work with your hands then. Shape the fall like a potter shapes clay. Not rushing, not scrambling, but whispering into the cracks. Waiting for the right moments to press your hand against the heart and feel it shift under your palm. I miss those days. The world was cruder then. Steel and stone, blood and banners. But the souls... oh, the souls were the same. Pride was pride, whether wrapped in iron plates or Instagram filters. And the fall, the true fall, always came not through overt sin, but through goodness rotted inward. Which brings me to one of my finer works. A soul that still makes the marrow of my memory warm with satisfaction. Sir Aldrich of Verdun. Sir Aldrich was a knight in the purest sense. Not merely a soldier, a legend. Merciful in battle, humble in victory, fiercely loyal to his king, to his brothers in arms, and most dangerously, to the interference itself. He knelt often. He prayed before every campaign. He gave away spoils of war to the poor. He wept at funerals for men who tried to kill him. He was, by every mortal measure, untouchable. So I did not tempt him with lust. I did not tempt him with greed. I did not whisper revenge into his dreams. No. Those were for lesser souls. For Aldrich, I chose something finer, something nobler. I chose praise. It started after a battle where Aldrich, against the advice of his captains, spared a captured enemy lord. He returned home to parades. Sermons were preached about his mercy. Songs were sung about his restraint. Women wept at the sight of him. He demurred, of course, spoke of unworthiness. But I saw it. The flicker. The moment he listens just a heartbeat too long to the crowd's adoration. The way his fingers tightened slightly on the reins when they cheered his name. So I whispered, not loudly, not often, but just enough. You are the sword of righteousness. You are the vessel of justice. You are the embodiment of mercy itself. And over the years, not days, not weeks, but years, that whisper took root. His humility turned performative. He began to watch how others watched him, began to savor the songs, the murals painted in his honor, began to believe that his victories were not gifts of grace, but testaments to his own divine election. And then the resentment came, small at first. A baron given honors for a minor victory, a younger knight praised for a clever siege. It gnawed at him. He smiled through gritted teeth, blessed them, congratulated them, and hated them inside. You're better, I reminded him. You are chosen. He started seeking battles not to protect, but to prove. To prove he was still the favored one. To prove that his mercy was more pure, his justice more righteous, his legend more eternal. And then, the final crack. A border city under the church's protection insulted his honor. No true slight, no rebellion. Just a few ill-chosen words from a drunken mayor questioning his motives. And Aldrich snapped. He gathered a private force. He stormed the city walls under the cover of darkness. He slaughtered soldiers sworn to the same faith he claimed to defend. He baptized the streets in blood and called it righteous judgment. And when the church heard of it, they excommunicated him by sundown. He didn't even protest. By then, he was convinced that they had betrayed him. He died months later, alone, hunted, sick from wounds that never healed properly. No songs, no parades, no weeping maidens. Just a broken sword half buried in a swamp, and a soul that went snarling into the pit, still convinced he had been right. This is the true art. Not dragging a monster down, but bending a good man until he breaks himself. A monster's fall is expected. A hero's fall makes the ground itself crack. because when a righteous man falls, he takes light with him. He leaves others stumbling in the dark. He leaves wounds that bleed for generations, and he never hears the snap of his own soul until it's too late. Sir Aldrich is remembered in some corners of the world, not as a villain, not even as a martyr, just a cautionary tale whispered among knights and soldiers. Beware the pride that rides in behind victory. They don't know the full story, but I do. And every time a good man craves the sound of his own name being sung more than the sound of prayer in his ears, I smile. Because pride is eternal, and time, no matter how it marches, always brings new banners to fall. Because when a hero falls, others stumble with him. One man's ruin is a tragedy. A good man's ruin is a legacy. Scriix, Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division, Historian of Ruins. Oliver here. There's something colder about this one. Not the story itself. I've heard tales of knights and fallen heroes to know how they end. No, it's the way Scriix tells it. Without anger, without mockery, just precision. And what unsettles me isn't how Sir Aldrich fell. It's how familiar it seems. The need to be seen, the need to be valued, the need to prove your worth, not to the world maybe, but to yourself. It doesn't always roar like arrogance. Sometimes it hides inside prayers, inside victories, inside the good things we cling to because we're too afraid to let grace be enough. It wasn't exactly Aldrich's sins that destroyed him. It was his virtues, twisted just slightly off-center, turned inward by a whisper he thought was his own ambition for righteousness. And that's what makes me pause tonight. Because it's easy to guard against obvious sins, easier to catch the lies that come wearing ugliness, but it's harder, much harder to catch the lies that come dressed in applause. It's harder to see the pride growing like ivy around your faith when it looks so much like fruit. I'm not afraid of falling into rage or hatred. I'm afraid of loving the sound of my own goodness more than the sound of his voice. I'm still standing, but tonight I'm standing quieter, watching the ground under my feet, listening a little more carefully to which voice I'm really hearing. Oliver. Entry 10. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. You have to catch them early. That's always been the rule. The old ones, the ones who have been staggering along the path of faith for decades, dragging themselves bloody and stubborn behind banners they barely remember raising, they are harder to move. They know the terrain too well. They have tasted failure and survived it. It is the new ones that must be crushed. The tender shoots, the sparks before the flame. Their faith is untested. Their roots are shallow. Their understanding is paper-thin and trembling. Strike fast, strike hard, and you can rip it up before it flowers, before it seeds, before it infects others. I have seen it happen 1,000 times. A new convert, bright-eyed and reckless and on fire, collapsing within months under the weight of doubt and loneliness. A first prayer shouted into the void and seemingly unanswered. A first humiliation among peers. The laughter, the isolation, the shame. A slow, choking silence, where once there was boldness. That is the way it should be. That is the proper order of things. And so now I turn to Jacob Hill, freshly marked, barely born into faith, still slick with the illusions of certainty, still believing that the interference speaks at every sunrise, that every breath of joy must be a confirmation of his belonging. He's bright, and I hate that about him. Not in the way mortals mean brightness, not cleverness or charm. I mean a kind of inner shine, a light under the skin that he doesn't even know he carries yet. But it will draw predators like blood in the water. Already, I can smell the nervous pride coiling under his prayers. Already, I can taste the brittle hunger for approval when he speaks of his newfound beliefs. It won't be difficult. It shouldn't be difficult. I will isolate him, not by violence, but by exhaustion. I will whisper that he is alone, that he is foolish, that the things he believes in are not merely wrong, they are laughable. I will stoke the slow burn of embarrassment, make him question why he feels out of place, make him wonder if it really is conviction he holds, or simply fear of being different. And if he stumbles, even once, the shame will feed on itself. He will spiral without needing my help. A self-sustaining collapse, elegant, efficient, the way it has always been. But something is off. The plans blur when I think of them. I wrote down the sequence earlier, the precise temptations, the moments of applied pressure, the conversations to sabotage, and yet when I review the parchment, the ink runs sideways, pooling into shapes I can't recognize. Jacob resists, not by will, not by strength, but by some stupid, clumsy buoyancy that he doesn't even understand. I nudged doubt during his lectures, but he smiled afterward. It shakes off the discomfort like rain sliding from a shield. I pushed loneliness into his afternoons, the silence, the empty seats at his table, and yet he lifts his head and hums worship songs under his breath as he walks alone. It shouldn't be happening. It doesn't happen. Not to the new ones. Their roots are supposed to be tender. Their faith is supposed to wilt at the first drought. And yet he endures. Stupidly, blindly, as if something keeps catching him just before the ground can swallow him. I can feel it now. That pressure. That unbearable, endless weight pressing from nowhere, from everywhere, from the sense of a hand resting just out of sight, just beyond reach, ready to close around the soul I am trying to suffocate. Not oversight, not the courts, not any infernal authority. Something pure, something clean, something that burns brighter and hotter than the sun and hell itself, but without the actual heat. I claw harder. I push sharper doubts, sharper guilt, sharper loneliness. I breathe weariness into his bones. I stitch insecurity into the fabric of his friendships. I drench his mind in every whisper of "you are not enough." And yet, Jacob stumbles, but he does not fall. He aches, but he does not break. He prays, not with eloquence, not with grandeur, but with stubborn, defiant faith that refuses to die no matter how much rot I pour into the cracks. It is infuriating, it is humiliating, it is unnatural. This is not how it should go. This is not how it has ever gone. When we strike the new ones, they collapse. They do not smile into the void and whisper thanks for the pain, and yet Jacob refuses to die. I will not be made a fool again. I will not lose another. I will tear him down if I have to burn the very air around him to do it. I will not be erased. I will not be ignored. I will not... No, I have not lost, not yet. I'll write again soon. I will document his ruin. It will be slow, it will be painful, it will be mine. Signed, Scriix. Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division, still here, still fighting. Well, that entry was a little strange. I've been thinking about it for a long time tonight. Long after I closed the journal. Long after the words stopped bleeding off the page. Scriix can't see it yet. He's too tangled in his own hatred, too wrapped in the illusion that his war is still a fair fight. That if he just tries harder, strikes sharper, whispers longer, he can win. But it's obvious to me now. And it would be almost funny if it weren't so achingly beautiful. Jacob isn't standing alone. He was never standing alone. Every clumsy prayer, every tired hymn hummed in the dark, every desperate reaching for light he couldn't see, he was being carried. Carried by a grace so quiet, so unassuming, that a demon as seasoned and brutal as Scriix couldn't even recognize it for what it was. Not because it wasn't there, but because pride blinds more surely than any veil. Scriix still thinks this is a battle he can win. He still thinks he can claw Jacob away from the light if he just finds the right angle, the right weakness, or the right pressure point. And he doesn't realize, he never has, that the only reason he was ever able to touch Jacob in the first place was because heaven permitted him to do it. Not out of weakness, but out of strength. Because every trial Jacob endures and survives isn't a mark against grace. It's a proclamation of it. Every whisper of doubt Scriix breathes, every cruel pressure he applies, every snare he sets, it is all swallowed up in a deeper mercy that turns even evil's best efforts into stepping stones towards sanctification. Jacob isn't losing. He's being refined. And Scriix, for all his rage, for all his ancient cruelty, is just a pawn playing into the hands of a king that he cannot touch. I think that's what stings the most for them deep down, the demons. Not that they lose, but that they are made to serve the very glory they seek to destroy. Every failure, every collapse, every furious whisper, it all bends back toward the light. Not because evil wanted it, but because it never had a say to begin with. There's a line in scripture I keep thinking about. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Jacob's struggle is not a sign that he's abandoned. It's a sign that he's beloved. And as I sit here, the journal open beside me, I realize something else. I'm not abandoned either. Every time I thought I was failing, every time I thought I was alone, every time I felt the silence pressing in and thought it meant absence, it was actually the presence of a God who doesn't need to shout to be near, doesn't need to shout to be heard. The war is real, the enemy is real, but the victory was written long before the first whisper of temptation ever hissed its way into human ears. And tonight, Tonight I believe that in my bones. Signed, Oliver. Entry 11. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division, Scriix. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing broken. These things happen. We lose momentum sometimes. We face setbacks. The work isn't clean, not efficient, not predictable, not like they pretend it is in the oversight reports. It's always been this way. Always. Jacob Hill is no different. He's just resistant, slippery, a minor anomaly. A complication to be corrected with sharper tools and heavier hands. I know the methods. I know the rhythms of collapse better than most. You isolate first, then you shame, then you offer false comforts, anger, cynicism, lust, anything to plug the wound faith leaves behind when it tears loose. And if that fails, if for some reason the soul still clings, then you break the body, crush the surroundings, fracture the relationships, sour the dreams, strip the future bare. There are always ways. Always. Jacob should be unraveling already. I laid the foundations. I planted subtle whispers of pride. I sowed the seeds of alienation. I whispered every shame for every clumsy prayer, every failed temptation resisted. The ground should be soft underfoot. The structure should be creaking already. But it isn't. He stumbles, yes. He falters, of course. But he keeps reaching for something beyond himself. Clumsy, broken, and yet effective. There is a weight in his prayers I cannot dislodge. A stubbornness that grows heavier the more I strike. It shouldn't be happening, not to him, not to a child barely out of spiritual infancy. Not when I have measured the angles, timed the pressure points, and calculated the collapse. It is the air. The weight pressing down again, the one I cannot name. The one I will not name. It warps my work. It makes the edges of my words blur when I try to write them. It makes the very pages hot. There's something wrong with my journal itself. I wrote the entry before, the strategies, the stages, and when I turned back to it, half the ink had bled into strange, unformed shapes. Not erased, not gone, just distorted, as if the words themselves were trying to flee the page. I rewrite, I adapt. I will not be undone by faulty parchment or phantom resistance. I attacked through pride again today. Jacob sat in a lecture hall surrounded by clever voices, sophisticated sneers cloaked in academic language. I whispered, "You are alone among fools, you are brighter, you are better." It should have bloomed into arrogance, into disdain, into resentment. Instead, Jacob bowed his head, prayed, quietly, visibly, in the middle of the room. He thanked the interference for humility. He asked for a softened heart. He smiled at the mockers. It burned. It burned worse than defiance would have. It was victory, but it was not mine. I tried to write a second plan, to escalate. The ink on this very page fought me. It bled backward, ruining 3 pages. I tore them out. I scrawled new schemes, harsher ones, and still the parchment shuddered under my hand as if something unseen was breathing against it. Watching, judging, refusing to let my words root. I sharpened my whispers. I sowed doubt, fear, and loneliness and exhaustion. I called on every old cruelty that had worked in 1,000 other souls. And Jacob knelt beside his bed tonight, tears running down his face, thanking the interference, for loving him in his weakness. Not despite it, but because of it. He prayed through his failure. It is unbearable. It is wrong. I will not lose him. I will not be erased. I will not be ignored. I will not be left to rot nameless and forgotten among the failures of my kind. Jacob Hill will fall. He must. Or else. Or else what? Or else I was never anything at all. Signed, Scriix, Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division. Still fighting. Still fighting still. I can feel it now. It's not subtle anymore. The walls are cracking. Scriix is unraveling, bleeding into the very pages he once wrote with such cold precision. And it's not because Jacob has become invincible. It's not because the attacks have stopped being clever, sharp, and personal. It's because the attacks don't matter anymore. They can't root. They can't infect. They can only shriek against the stone walls of something deeper, something stronger, something more eternal than all the malice hell can muster. Grace. Scriix doesn't understand it. He can't. He thinks the war is about strength. The strongest will, the sharpest temptation, the deepest cut. He thinks if he just crafts the right collapse, the soul will cave in like every other broken thing he's ever touched. But grace doesn't work that way. It's not strength that Jacob draws on when he kneels, broken, weeping prayers into his pillow. It's surrender. It's trust. And the enemy, the interference, as they call it, has never been impressed by pride. It has always moved strongest in the broken, in the weary, in the ones who know they can't stand on their own. Scriix is raging against a fortress he will never see the foundations of. He claws at the surface cracks while roots run deeper than he knows how to dig. And the more he rages, the more he loses, because pride has no patience, and grace doesn't need speed. It just needs to be. Tonight, I don't feel the despair that haunted the earlier entries. I don't feel the fear. I feel awe. Awe that all the fury of hell still cannot topple a boy praying with cracked words and trembling hands. Awe that the war was not won with thunder, but with a whisper. And that the grace holding Jacob is the same grace that has carried me every time I thought I was falling into silence. Signed, Oliver. Entry 12. 5 years ago. The parchment is warped tonight. The ink runs along the fibers like blood finding cracks in broken stone, but I, Scriix, write anyway. Because if I do not act, if I do not win, then the punishments awaiting me will make the last 1,000 years seem like indulgence. Management summoned me today. Not in the usual way. No smirking intermediaries, no passive-aggressive memos half-burned on arrival. No. They sent for me directly, escorted by enforcers from the reclamation divisions. The ones who deal with failure not through demotion but through recreation. You see them sometimes, if you know where to look. hunched figures wandering the lower corridors, muttering to themselves, stitched together from the remnants of what they once were. They used to be like me. Once. The meeting chamber was colder than usual. No fires, no noise. Only the sound of my own footsteps echoing far too loud on stone that looked suspiciously like bone. And then, at the far end, sat the division head. Cloaked in writhing shadows, face unreadable, voice like rusted iron dragged over glass. He didn't scream, he didn't threaten, he simply spoke. "The soul of Jacob Hill is not yours to fumble. He is marked. Marked by the interference for greater work. If you allow him to flourish, if you allow his flame to survive, you will not simply be reassigned. You will be remade." The words etched themselves into my mind, sharper than any branding iron. Remade. Reconstructed into something lesser, something grotesque. Something that still served, but without memory, without dignity, without name. They said Jacob Hill was marked. They do it for the worst of us. They make examples of us. They turn failures into reminders that hell tolerates ambition, tolerates cruelty, tolerates even rebellion. But it does not tolerate waste. And if I lose Jacob Hill, they will carve my failure into my very being. They will hollow me out and leave me crawling, nameless, through the dust of my own disgrace. I've seen what they do. I will not join them. I will not become one of the forgotten. I will not. Hell asked me if I needed help. If perhaps they could assign another demon to my case. I laughed at them until I was blue. Me, Scriix? In need of help to bring ruination to a human soul? No. Not mighty old Scriix. I could sell crack to a priest. I'm the demon who turned knights into butchers, faithful into fools. I will be the solitary author of Jacob Hill's destruction. I know his importance now. It's not just his soul at stake. It's the flame he carries. The lives he will touch if left unchecked. He doesn't even know his own weight yet. But the interference does. And now so do we. That is why they are watching so closely. That is why management cares. A single spark can burn an empire to the ground if it catches the right wind. And Jacob Hill is a spark waiting for breath. I will not let him ignite. I will crush him. I will bury him. I will sever the roots before they can drink deeply enough to grow, even if I must burn the fields around him. Even if I must tear apart every relationship, every hope, every sacred dream he clings to, I will have his soul, I swear it. I will have the soul of Jacob Hill. I will. The journal ends in scrawls and scratches. Words dissolved mid-sentence. Jacob Hill. The name blazed in my mind the moment I read it. I knew I had heard it before. Not in the journal, not in the whispers, but in the steady hum of a world being quietly remade. I, Oliver, sat there in the dark, the journal still trembling faintly in my hands, as I whispered into the silence. Why, God? Why show me all of this? Why let me carry the weight of these pages? And then, without violence, without terror, the television turned on. No shrieking static, no howling demons. Just light. Just warmth. And there he was. Jacob Hill. The name that shook nations not with anger, not with politics, not with noise, but with prayer. With simple, relentless, unshakable faith. The same Jacob Hill Scriix swore he would destroy. The same Jacob Hill heaven shielded through every whispered doubt and midnight attack, preaching to tens of thousands, calling broken men and women back to the light, not with cleverness, not with spectacle, with humility, with hope, with a strength forged in fires I now knew he had never faced alone. And I understood. This journal was not a trap. It was not a temptation. It was a testimony. A testimony that evil roars, but collapses under its own weight. A testimony that grace endures, not through might, but through faithfulness. A testimony that every whispered prayer, every clumsy hymn, every exhausted act of trust shakes the very foundations of hell. Jacob Hill was not spared because he was strong. He was spared because heaven is stronger still. Because grace moves quieter than evil expects, but infinitely more powerful. I finish transcribing these pages not to glorify the darkness. I finish them because someone else someday will need to know that the war is real, that the whispers of temptation are persistent, that the darkness knows your name, but more importantly, that the light knows it too, and the light never forgets, and the light never loses. Let this be a tribute. Let it be a warning. Let it be a promise that faith, even when battered and bloodied, is never alone, and that in the end, when every demon has raged themselves into dust, when every proud whisper has rotted into silence, only one voice will remain, and it will not be theirs. It will be his. Signed, your faithful servant, Oliver. Hey everybody, Kevin from Nightmares Nightly here. I just wanted to let y'all know I created a Spotify account. So if y'all enjoy listening to audio in the background or just prefer Spotify in general, I'll leave a link to it in the description and comments down below. I'll be slowly uploading the backlog of my videos over there, along with every new story as well. Give me a follow and a rating if you could. And as always, thanks for listening everybody.